My company is Celsius Software. We develop JavaScript applications for our clients. One of our main areas of activity is developing browser extensions, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. But let me start at the beginning, and when I say the beginning, I mean really the beginning, like Genesis beginning, with the Tower of Babel. Probably most of you have heard the story from the Bible of the people in this ancient world who gathered in the land of Shinar, which I think is somewhere near modern-day Iraq. And back then, all of them spoke the same language, and they decided that they were going to build a tower to the sky. And the fact that they all spoke the same language gave them incredible abilities, and I'll turn to a high authority to explain this. I don't think I've quoted God before in a talk. I think maybe the closest was Tim Berners-Lee, but here it is from Genesis. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is what they begin to do. And now nothing will be withholden from them, which they purpose to do." In other words, because they all speak the same language and they can all communicate, they're going to be able to do whatever they want. And God didn't like this, so what did he do? He didn't send a plague or fire or flood. He scrambled their brains so that they all started speaking different languages, and the whole project fell apart. And this is relevant to the topic I want to talk about, which is browser extensions, as I'll explain in a little bit. But let me first talk a little bit about what browser extensions are and why they're important. So when you're developing a web application, probably everybody in this room is familiar with that. What you typically have is like a rectangle in the browser, and you can do whatever you want inside that rectangle. You can display media, you can display text, you can build fancy applications. But what happens if you want to break out of that rectangle? What if you want to change the functionality of the browser itself? You might want to do something like this. Have something in the toolbar, an additional button, which is going to call up a menu or other information. Or maybe you want to change the context menu so that I can select text in the page and do some special action that the browser manufacturer didn't anticipate. I might even want to completely change the way that the browser displays media, and find a better way to browse and search inside a media library. And also what people sometimes want to do is redesign integral parts of the browser functionality. So I might want to change the way the download manager works in the browser. I might have better ideas of how to do it. I might want to redesign how the password manager works. Maybe I don't want to see so many ads. So all of these things are features that you wouldn't be able to add to the browser as a third-party developer without browser extensions. Of course, some of these things or some portions of these things have since been added by the browser vendors themselves as integral features of some of the browser platforms. And this is one of the great things about extensions, is it gives third-party developers an opportunity to innovate, to experiment, to try new things, and the browser manufacturers can observe what the market tells them, which of the extensions are most popular, and that can give them an idea of which features they should concentrate on to add to the browser itself. Another thing that add-ons are cool for is to layer functionality across a whole range of websites. So let's say that I have a really awesome price comparison website, and you can go on it, and you can search in a database, and you can find every product, and you can find the cheapest price on the website where you can get it. And this is really useful if every time that somebody goes to buy something, they think, oh, wait a second, I better go to that website, and I'm going to search in the database, and I'm going to find out whether I'm buying it from the right place. But of course, human nature doesn't work that way. When you're going to buy something, you usually don't think of going and checking for a price somewhere else. So with an extension, you can get around this problem because it's actually modifying the functionality of the browser on every website you're on. So I'm about to buy this TV, and the bar pops up and says, wait, you can get it for whatever that says, $96 cheaper at some other website. This is something also that you really can't do without extensions. There's been efforts to do this. I think the best known was the ill-fated Dig toolbar. I don't know if anybody remembers this from a few years ago, but Dig decided that they wanted to layer functionality across the web, give you access to the Dig functionality on any website you were on, but they didn't want to do it with a browser extension. So they tried to put the whole web inside an iframe and have their bar on top. And I think the founder of Dig, Kevin Rose, can probably explain the results better than I can. He said, framing content with an iframe is bad for the internet. It causes confusion when bookmarking, breaks with iframe busters, and has no ability to communicate with the lower frame. It's an inconsistent, wonky user experience, and I'm happy to say we are killing it when we launch the new Dig. You probably can tell from this quote, it didn't work out too well. They should have used a browser extension. Okay, so browser extensions definitely let you do cool, useful stuff. And I think there's not enough understanding of how unique the browser is as an environment because it gives you this opportunity to extend it in ways that the developers of the software didn't anticipate. There's really no other software, I think, is comparable in the extent to which you can take an application and modify it and extend it as a third-party developer. But what is it like to develop a browser extension? I have an artist's depiction actually here of what it's like. This is supposed to be a picture of hell, and you may think that I'm exaggerating when I say that it's hell to develop browser extensions, but my company does a lot of this work, and I can assure you that trying to get the same browser extension to work in the same way in major browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, is really hellish. And the reason is because they all have completely different frameworks for developing browser extensions. There's no standards whatsoever. Nobody said, okay, here's how you develop a browser extension, so each of the manufacturers invented their own. And so what you end up trying to do is to, in a way, knock a square peg into a round hole. Let me talk a little bit about how the different extension development platforms work, because I'm guessing probably most of you in this room haven't had experience developing extensions. Every time I ask that question, no one raises their hand. So Firefox is kind of a pioneer in this area, and the inventors of Firefox, Mozilla, were visionary when they designed the browser itself, because they made the whole user interface of the browser specified in markup. And back then, this was quite a few years ago, HTML wasn't really up to the task of specifying a application user interface, so they invented their own language called Zool, stands for XML User Interface Language, similar to HTML, but with more capabilities to allow you to create a real desktop application with it. And they also did some pretty cool stuff with the guts of the browser. So they have this component object model called XPCOM, cross-platform component object model, which runs on all the different platforms that Firefox runs on. And it gives you really low-level control over the guts of the browser. So everything the browser is doing, the download manager, the web request, is exposed using IDL interfaces. And if you're a developer, you can get in there. And even in JavaScript, because it's a cross-language standard, you can get in there and you can modify the functionality of the browser. So because the browser is constructed in this modular, extensible way, they were able to build a really powerful extension framework. And in essence, the way this works is you have these so-called Zool overlays. So it's an additional snippet of Zool that you layer over the Zool that specifies the standard browser user interface. And with that overlay, you can change everything about the browser user interface. You can add stuff, you can remove stuff, you can modify stuff. You really have almost unlimited control if you want to go crazy in making the browser look different from how the creators of the browser intended. Because of this really powerful extension platform that Firefox has, they also have the biggest extension ecosystem. There's something over maybe 10, 11,000 add-ons on the official Mozilla add-on library. So it's been a pretty big success. And now let's talk about Chrome. Chrome, I would say, builds on the experience of Mozilla. I think that they appreciated that Firefox had pioneered something really interesting with their extension framework. And they asked themselves the question, what would it look like to develop a browser extension if we were going to make that development like developing for the web, so that the same tools and skill sets and frameworks can be used? And what they came up with is the Chrome extension framework, which is all done using web standards, so no more Zool, no more XPCOM, it's all HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Of course, sometimes you want to do things that you can't do from a normal web app inside your browser extension. Like you might want to delete a cookie, or you might want to spy on a web request and modify something about that web request. So they have a whole suite of APIs for doing this. It's modern, it's only existed for a few years, so it's using some of the latest techniques, and it's pretty broad in what it allows you to do, but it's also much more focused and limited than what Firefox has. There's not nearly as many things that you can do, for example, in changing the user interface. So if we look at what it allows you to do, there's really targeted APIs that let you do things like, okay, I want to add a button to the toolbar, and I do it in a very simple way. There's no Zool overlays that give you unlimited control over the browser user interface. And then they did this on purpose, because first of all, for security reasons, I think they wanted to limit what you can do. In Firefox, a browser extension has all the capabilities of any application, so it could do malicious things very easily. And also, they wanted to make it easier and more approachable for people to develop extensions. It's kind of the an incarnation of the 80-20 principle. You have maybe 20% of the power of what you could do with the Firefox extension system, but you can do most of the really useful things that you would want to do in a browser extension, but much more easily. And they're pretty active in extending the extension framework as well. So when they see use cases that don't work out with the APIs they currently provide, they're extending it to give those capabilities in future versions of Chrome. So now that I've described Firefox and Chrome, you might say, okay, well, why were you saying that extension development is so hellish? This doesn't sound so bad. Of course, I haven't talked yet about Internet Explorer, and we do quite a lot of Internet Explorer development at my company. And this is really true that if you walk into our office and you see some guy like weeping and pounding on his keyboard and wondering whether he should just take his laptop and throw it out the window and get a new job as a hairdresser, you can be pretty sure that that guy is doing Internet Explorer development. It's really frustrating. I do a lot of it myself. I know what I'm talking about. And the problem in a nutshell is that it's not an API that's designed for web developers to develop browser extensions. It's designed for Windows developers. It's just like developing on Windows. If you remember the US Justice Department case against Microsoft in the 90s, where they said that they were unfairly bundling Internet Explorer with Windows, the argument that Microsoft came back with is, wait a second, we can't unbundle Internet Explorer because it really is, it's a component of Windows, it's part of Windows. And there's a lot of truth to that. So if you want to develop Internet Explorer extensions, you have to learn all the Windows APIs, you have to learn all the intricacies of the operating system, you have to program in C++, a lot of this stuff is undocumented, it's underdocumented. You have to be a really badass programmer to do Internet Explorer development. I mean, basically, I would say, for the most part, you just don't want to go there. And I'm sure this is the reason why, when you look at the breadth of extensions available for Internet Explorer compared to other browsers, what you see mainly is just a bunch of dodgy toolbars rather than really useful extensions. Okay, and that's why we're developing Ancho. It's a work in progress, but it's something that we've been working on for the better part of this year. We're really far in the process. And the idea here is to provide a single unified API that developers can use to develop for all these different browser platforms. If you're developing for Chrome and Firefox today, what that means, because they have completely different APIs, is I've developed my extension for Chrome, developed it again for Firefox, practically no code reuse in most cases, and then if I want to fix a bug or add a new feature, I'm going to have to do it twice. And I didn't even mention IE. So you add IE to that mix, it's just a really intimidating thing to face. So what we really want is just to have a way, like you do with web applications. I don't have to write a different web application for Internet Explorer and for Firefox, for the most part. And for browser extensions, it should be the same thing. So how do I do this? How do I create an API which is going to support all three of the major browser platforms? Well, what I need is some kind of JavaScript API designed for web developers, but specifically focused on developing browser extensions. And as it turns out, there's a perfect API for our purposes that already exists, and it's the Chrome API. I mean, this is exactly what the Chrome guys set out to do, right? They set out to design an API specifically for browser extensions. Very smart people at Google. They've done good software design, so why would we reinvent the wheel? And another really great thing about using the Chrome API as our lingua franca for cross-browser extension development is that we don't have to worry about Chrome. Chrome already supports the Chrome API. So we've already reduced the problem of developing a cross-browser API from having to support 3 browsers to supporting just 2 browsers. So Ancho really is the Chrome API. Our goal is to be able to take a Chrome extension. Some of you may know it's in a CRX file, zipped up, and just be able to install that CRX file in Firefox or Internet Explorer and have it run. There is a big question mark, however, and that question mark is this possible? Is it going to be possible to take a completely different extension framework that the makers of the browsers didn't anticipate and get that to run in Firefox or in Internet Explorer? Like I said, we've been working on this for a few months now, and I'm happy to say that I'm very confident at this point that the answer is yes. Maybe we're not going to get every single detail of the Chrome API to work in those browsers. I think there might be things on the edges that are just not possible to implement. It's possible, but definitely the core, the really important functionality that's going to get the vast bulk of Chrome extensions to work in those other browsers is possible to implement in Firefox and Internet Explorer. And that's actually a testament to the power and flexibility of the browser extension frameworks that those manufacturers have created. You may not actually want to develop in them. You don't probably want to write extensions for Internet Explorer if you can avoid it. But if you delve into the capabilities of that platform, you can do some pretty amazing things. So let me talk quickly about how the Chrome extension framework works, and very briefly also about how we're implementing this for Firefox and Internet Explorer. One of the core concepts of developing extensions for Chrome is that you have a so-called background window. So you have something that looks and acts like a normal window. It has a window object, it has a document object when you're programming in JavaScript. It's just invisible, and it's not linked to any particular website. It's running in the background, tied to your extension. So any code that I want to run continually in the background, I can put it in that background window. And the cool thing about it is because they've made it look like a real window, you can run all the standard web frameworks in it. So for example, jQuery often relies on the existence of a window object. So if they had just a pure JavaScript environment like Node.js, say for the background window, then there would be problems. But because it's a real window, you can just run all those frameworks out of the box. And if you want to modify the functionality of a website inside a specific tab, that's where you use these so-called content scripts. So the content script is tied to a specific tab. It's a bit like Grease Monkey, if anybody has experience with that. It has a shared DOM, so it works with the same DOM as the web page itself. But it's able to manipulate and change that DOM using extension functionality. The content scripts, for security reasons, have a lot less access to the specific Chrome APIs than the background page, so they can't do malicious things. But there is a messaging protocol that they use, so the content script can talk to the background window, and if it wants to do something that it doesn't have capabilities to do itself, it can just send a message and say, we want to do this and have the background page do it. So how do we implement this in Internet Explorer and Firefox? It's actually, on a high level, fairly straightforward. We create a background window in the most obvious way possible. We actually create a real window with a real web browser object embedded in it, scripts run in it, and all we have to do to make it Chrome capable is inject this Chrome object into it, which has, it's a JavaScript object, which has all these little additional JavaScript objects hanging off them, tabs, bookmarks, et cetera, et cetera. And then implementing the Chrome framework in Firefox becomes a question of implementing all these specific APIs using the underlying functionality of the browser. So if I want to implement the API called chrome.tabs.create, which creates a new tab, I have to use the Firefox APIs to create a new tab when that's called. So there are some that are pretty challenging, but we're slogging our way through them. And another cool thing about the work that we're doing is that we're exploiting a fairly new feature of Firefox, which is called bootstrapped extensions. So people who use Firefox and have used Firefox extensions before have probably seen this screen quite a lot. Every time you install an extension, uninstall an extension, disable, enable, you have to restart your browser. And that's actually a bigger deal than it might seem at first glance, because it takes you right out of that web paradigm. People aren't used to having to restart their browser, and it's a barrier for people to go ahead and use extensions. And Chrome doesn't have this limitation, for example. So what the Firefox people have done in the last few releases is give you the capability with a bunch of extra programming to make your extension bootstrap so that you don't have to restart the browser when the person installs, uninstalls, enables it, and so forth. But doing this is a pain in the ass. It's hard to do. It's not that well documented. So, and this is kind of a recurring theme in our work on Ancho. We are a team of professionals standing behind you, doing the hard work for you. So we've implemented the bootstrapped extensions. We've done it once. We've done it in the right way. And other developers now just don't have to worry about implementing bootstrapped extensions. If you use Ancho, it just works. OK, I'm just putting this slide up to scare you. This is a little bit of our architecture of Ancho on Internet Explorer, and it ties right into what I was saying just now. This isn't something that you want to write for every extension that you produce for Internet Explorer. This is rocket science. So what you really want to have is a framework that implements this once, that does it properly, and you can just reuse it over and over again. And again, it's exactly what we've done with Ancho. So just one last quick point. What if I want to do things in Firefox and Internet Explorer that the Chrome API doesn't let me do? For example, Firefox and Internet Explorer have toolbars. Chrome doesn't. And we know from our clients that people aren't always going to be satisfied in just restricting themselves to the features of Chrome. So what we're also doing is creating our own proprietary namespace called Ancho, and we can hang some additional APIs on there that aren't available in Chrome. And the really cool thing is, in this toolbar example, what we've done is to take a normal native toolbar in Firefox and in Internet Explorer, but to put a web browser inside it. So the contents of the toolbar is actually a little long, thin web page made up of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And the nice thing about this is we can even make it work in Chrome. And the way we make it work in Chrome is just swap out the CSS for something that's going to format more in this rectangular format that's used generally in these so-called browser action pop-ups in Chrome, which is the way that you replace the toolbar. And we're able to get, even in the case where Chrome doesn't support this feature, we're able to get maximum code reuse because we're using the same HTML, we're using the same JavaScript. All we'd have to do is swap out and use a different CSS. And last thing, in terms of extension management, the Internet Explorer Extension Manager is really hellish. It's horrible. I don't think that it's something that the end user should ever have to look at. And it's really impossible to extend it anyway. So what we're planning to do in Internet Explorer is to redevelop the Chrome Extension Manager. It runs in a tab anyway. So you'll be able to open a tab to your extensions, just like you would in Chrome, enable them, disable them, and you'll never have to go through that horrible Internet Explorer add-on manager again. In Firefox, because they have these Zool overlays, there are a lot more capabilities for extending the add-on manager. So in the case of Firefox, what we're doing is modifying the extension manager so that the Ancho add-ons look like real native Firefox add-ons from the perspective of the user. So even though you might only have one real Firefox add-on installed, Ancho itself, when you open the add-on manager, you'll see all the Chrome add-ons or Ancho add-ons that you've installed, and you'll be able to uninstall them, disable them, and so on, just like they were real Firefox add-ons. So extensions are fairly popular. The statistics I've seen is that maybe 50% or more of Chrome and Firefox users have at least one extension installed that they use. I don't know how many people who use Internet Explorer have extensions installed. The one thing I'm sure of is there's probably more people that actually want to have the extensions installed because it's so hard to figure out how to uninstall them. But when I mentioned earlier that there's 10 or 11,000 add-ons on the Firefox add-on website, that's pretty insignificant when you compare it, for example, to the iOS store, which has something like 700,000 applications. I read that Android has 500,000 applications. And why is this? Why aren't there more browser extensions? Well, that takes us back to what I started the talk with, the Tower of Babel. Now, I'm not saying that God intentionally made it hard to write cross-browser extensions. It's possible. But the fact remains that because I have to face this huge challenge of supporting all these different browsers in order to write something that's going to run in the major browsers, a lot of companies just aren't going to bother. They're going to look at the benefit they're going to get, and they're going to look at the cost and difficulty, and they're just going to say, okay, maybe we really don't need a browser extension. And my belief is that this happens a lot. And because I think that browser extensions can do some amazing things, I really think it's a shame. And this is the problem that we're trying to address with Ancho. So at the end of the day, what we're hoping is that by making it easier to develop extensions that run in all the different browsers, it's going to have a really revolutionary effect on the browser extension ecosystem itself, that people are going to be more motivated to face this problem, sit down and try to write a browser extension if they know that they're not going to have to do it 3 times, if they know that they're not going to have to go through all the hell of trying to write a browser extension for Internet Explorer and so forth. I don't know what people are going to come up with if they start to focus more energy on the browser extension space, but that's really the great thing about the market. And if you get enough innovation out there and you give the people the tools to innovate, you can be sure that they're going to create some pretty amazing things. And that's all for my talk. Thank you very much. I guess if anyone has questions, we have a few more minutes.
So what is licensing for Ancho? Do you license it?
You should, I guess you have to talk in the mic.
So is Ancho open source, or is it licensed, or what is the...
The plan is to have an open source license for non-commercial use and some kind of commercial license for commercial use. We haven't actually nailed down all the details of that yet, but definitely for non-commercial use it'll be free, and it's all open source. The source code is already up on GitHub. It's a work in progress, so if you want to go take a look at it, keep in mind that it's probably pretty unstable, but it's all up there and you can see in real time as we work on it.
Last question is, do you have any experience with extensions on smart TVs, smart TV browsers?
I haven't. I mean, like I say, our company does a lot of cross-browser extension development, and we're driven by the market, and we just haven't seen demand. Even Safari, people always come to me and they say, I'd like to have an extension for Firefox, Internet Explorer, Chrome, and Safari, and then we tell them how long it's going to take and what the price is, and they go, you know what, we don't need Safari. This happens time and time again. So, if there's demand for that, I'm definitely interested in looking at it. And I also think that, with this platform, once we finish the first version, one of the things we're going to work on is to extend it and support other browser platforms. We're just trying to hit the big 3 first, and that's plenty of work in itself.
how much do you need to actually care about browser differences when it comes to mobile devices? Like you have different display widths and so on mobile devices and different capabilities of the browsers. Do you need to care about that when you define the extensions with Ancho, or does it care about that itself, that it detects capabilities and resolution and so on?
Well, it's not really a question about Ancho. I think it's more just a question about browser extensions in general. And as far as I know, the only mobile browser which supports extensions now is mobile Firefox. So the ones that have the biggest market share, which are an Android browser and the iOS mobile Safari browser, don't support extensions at all. So I really can't answer that question. It's up to the browser manufacturers, first of all, to add some kind of proper browser extension mechanism to those mobile browsers, which I really hope they'll do. I have clients also who come to me and say, okay, this extension is great, but we want the same thing on mobile. And right now I have to disappoint them and say, it's just not possible. So we'll see what happens in that area. All right, terrific. Well, if anybody has any more questions afterwards or wants to talk about any details of Internet Explorer development and so forth, come and see me. I'd love to complain about it. Thank you very much.